Hello and welcome to English at Maynooth University. My name is Stephen O'Neill and I'm head of the department. In what follows here, I'm going to be talking to you about why English is the subject for you. I'm going to give you a sense of the issues and questions that the subject addresses, to give you a sense of the modules that you'll be doing in first year English here at Maynooth, and also then to give you a flavour of a lecture, what a lecture might be like if you were to choose English, the kind of approaches that we take to literary texts.
So we have an overview of some key questions or points that people might have. You might be wondering what the requirement is. What kind of grades do you need to have to do English at Maynooth University? So you choose English through the MH 101 arts degree. So you have to have the sufficient points for entry into MH 101. And you can choose your subject when you come into the arts degree. What we would recommend, however, is that you would have at least a B in Honours English in the Leaving Cert. You might be interested too in your degree options. So English is one of 35 subjects that you can take in the MH 101 arts degree. In first year English, you can take it as 15 credits or as 30 credits. That means it's one of the four subjects that you might be doing in first year English. So you could decide to have a more significant commitment, say, to the subject and take 30 credits. And I'll talk a little later on in the presentation about the structure of the first year degree and the ways in which those modules, if you're taking 15 credits, what modules you'll be doing, and if you're taking 30 credits, what modules you'll be doing. And you might like to know about the subject. The subject will be familiar to you because you've spent the last 6 years studying it and leading up to the Leaving Cert. But English at university is quite different to what you've done at Leaving Cert. It builds on it, but it's also different. We like to think that English at university takes you across historical periods, across cultures, locations, and genres. It will give you an understanding of literary genres, of poetry and drama and fiction. You're going to work with literary texts closely and also other forms of cultural production, such as film and new media. You might be interested too to know about the career paths. What can you do with an English degree? So graduates of the Department of English at Maynooth University have gone on to careers in education as primary school teachers and also secondary school teachers, have gone into the civil service, have gone on to careers in journalism, and also work in customer services and sales. So that hopefully gives you a sense of what you might do in English. I'm going to move on now to think about first year English more precisely and the question, why would you study this subject? So as I mentioned, you're going to learn about different literary forms, and in more precisely then, the conditions that shape writing. And those conditions might be historical, they might be geographical, they might be bound up with questions of identity valences, such as gender, race, and class. In studying English, you're going to gain an appreciation and an understanding of how literary texts enable us to appreciate our own complex world and how different approaches to and theories of literature change what we conceive of a literary text doing. A significant emphasis in university English is on different schools of critical thought, on literary criticism, and how these areas have shaped and continue to shape the subject of English literary studies. So, in studying English at university, then you're immersing yourself in a field of knowledge, and that will give you an enhanced understanding of the literary text. You're reading it in historical context, in cultural context, but you're also reading it through a set of literary approaches, of critical approaches to literature that will equip you with the skills to understand what a literary text is. So to think a little more about the structure of first year English, if you were taking English as a 15 credit subject, you have two core modules, EN 101 and EN 102, and they are in the first and second semester respectively. EN 101 is called Foundation English, and it's designed to provide you with the knowledge, experience, and writing skills that are required to develop and express well-informed opinions about what you are reading. So it's giving you the toolkit, the vocabulary that you will need in your degree if you continue on with English, and we very much hope you do. It will give you the toolkit to analyze a literary text, and it will enable you to write essays, to structure argument, to present ideas coherently and with a level of sophistication. In the second semester, you'll be taking a module called EN 102, Foundation English, and it focuses on poetry and drama. And it uses those two major literary forms. Again, it's a toolkit. It's about giving you the technical vocabulary, the critical vocabulary to understand a particular poetic form, for example, the sonnet, to understand the history of that form, but also to understand how that poem works. How is it using language in a very particular way? And you'll also be looking at drama as part of that module as well, the history of drama and the history of theatre, different approaches to understanding a play. What is a play? What is a particular genre as well? Thinking about the nature of tragedy and the nature of comedy, thinking about the politics of a dramatic form as well. So this slide outlines your options for taking English. As I say, there's 15 credits with EN 101 and EN 102, but you might be deciding that you are particularly interested in English and that you want to take English as a major subject in first year. So you'd be taking 30 credits. That's EN 106 and EN 107, and they are in the first and second semester respectively. So I'll just give you a moment there to look at that slide. As you see, it sets out your options for taking English and how you'd be taking English alongside 2 or 3 other subjects or critical skills from the groups available. And you find more details about those groups in the undergraduate prospectus and on the university website. So I'll just talk a little bit about 30 credits in English. This is for students who are especially interested in English. And so you're taking EN 101 and 102, those core modules that I mentioned a few moments ago, and also then 2 additional English modules. So EN 106 looks at the relationship between history and literature. It looks at how history erupts into literature, how particular historical periods might be represented in the texts of the time, but also in later texts. In EN 107, the module that runs in the second semester, you're being introduced to new methods of reading. And these include forms of literary criticism, foundational examples of literary criticism, such as Marxism, feminism, and post-colonial studies. And those 3 methodologies or approaches to literature as a way to equip you with a vocabulary, again, a critical vocabulary, to understand what a literary text is, how it responds to its own world, how it might imagine or create alternate ideas about our own world, or give us a way to think about our own world anew. You'd be interested to know, I'm sure, what you will be reading if you were to choose English at Maynooth University. So I'll just give here an overview of the content of the modules of EN 101 and EN 102. You can see there the list of text. In EN 101, you're looking at essays and the short story, moving from short narrative forms, such as the speech and the essay, into the short story, and then into the longer narrative form, the example of Jane Austen's novel, Pride and Prejudice. In 102, as I mentioned, it's a module that focuses on poetry and on drama. So you have a range of poetic texts which are taken from the Norton Anthology of Poetry. You're looking at the history of poetic forms. You're also looking at contemporary poetry. It's a module that's designed to give you the toolkit, the ability to read what we call undertake a close reading of a literary text. And in addition to poetry, you have a number of plays on that module. This is what the students have been working with this semester. The text may change from year to year, and that's important to bear in mind as part of the way university courses are designed, but the principles remain the same, and approaches to different literary forms and giving you the appropriate knowledge to understand those literary forms and how they operate. If you were choosing additional English, you have here the readings for EN 106 and EN 107. So EN 106, as I mentioned, a module that explores how history erupts into literature. And it focuses on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus from 1818, a text that thinks about creation. What is it for a human, Dr. Frankenstein, to create another being, a thing, a non-human? And Jeanette Winterson, a contemporary novelist, has responded to Shelley's novel in her novel Frankenstein from 2017. You can see the way the title puns on Shelley's own title. And that becomes an interesting way in which one text responds to another, how one text engages another text, what we call intertextuality, or the relationship between texts. These relationships can sometimes be conscious, but they can sometimes be unconscious or embedded. In 107, you can see you're focusing on three texts, and that gives you a way to think about the relationship between different literary forms. That module introduces you to different schools of critical thought, as I mentioned earlier on, and will give you a framing that will be foundational to your understanding of literature, should you choose to continue on with literature, the study of English in second and third year. Think of English then as something of a journey. It's your journey. You're going to develop a set of skills. You're going to be encouraged in taking English as a subject to engage in critical debate, to have the language to conduct a critical debate, to question the value and the meaning that is attributed to literature in ways that I've just done in relation to Jeanette Winterson's Frankenstein. So in first year English, you're going to develop critical and intellectual abilities. And if you continue with English into second and third year, you'll be building on those to an even further extent. I've mentioned earlier in the presentation that English is a world-facing subject. So it's not only engaging with historical periods, but with other cultures. And it's bringing to you an awareness of the multidimensional nature of human situations. We've just taken the example of the creature in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. What is it like to be in a world? What is it like to be born into a world where you're not like others? And in Shelley, in that moment, is maybe doing something that we can recognize in literature more generally, a sense of facing the other, of stepping outside of one's comfort zone, of the security of the self, and recognizing other situations, recognizing other sensibilities, recognizing the validity of all cultures. So English is an expansive subject. It can expand your mind. It generates an open and inquiring mind. And if that's you, then this may be the subject for you. If you enjoy reading, you have an appetite for reading, but you also want to know more about the literary and historical past, then English is a good subject for you. And it's also a good subject, I'd like to think, because it's through English that you gain a set of strong analytical skills. You're going to be reading closely, you're going to be doing research on a text, you're going to be doing research on a literary and historical period, you're going to be delving into that period. And through that exercise, through that process, you're developing analytical skills, you're also developing skills of articulation, how to articulate an argument. So writing skills, critical thinking skills that will appeal greatly to employers. There are skills that are valued in our society, the ability to problem solve or to look at a particular issue from a range of perspectives and then to evaluate the evidence and arrive at a judgment, arrive at an opinion of the problem or the issue to hand. I want to draw to a close now with some remarks that will give you a flavour of the subject, of what a lecture in English might be like. So I mentioned there a few moments ago Jeanette Winterson's Frankenstein. And we have here a quote from an epigraph from that novel. Only in the living of it does life seem ordinary. In the telling of it, we find ourselves strangers among the strange. Well, Winterson is here riffing off Shelley's Frankenstein, a novel that is about, as I said, the creation of a thing. the thing that will become the monster, the other, the strange creature, but yet a creature that absorbs literary texts. One of the things that the creature in Shelley's novel does is to read. And how he discovers himself, or the nature of his being, is through reading. One of the texts he takes up is John Milton's Paradise Lost, that epic poem from the early 17th century. So the creature finds out that, comes to understand his strangeness in reading Paradise Lost, and in discovering some kind of affinity with Satan in Paradise Lost, who for the creature becomes the hero of Milton's poem. So there we have an instance of the intertextuality I mentioned earlier on, how one text is referring, engaging with an earlier text, one that has come before it. And now we have an interesting kind of thread emerging where Winterson is engaging with Shelley's text and then thinking about what it is to represent something. So in the living of it, does life seem ordinary? It's in the telling of it that we encounter something new. We find ourselves strangers among the strange. And Winterson is here picking up on the idea that fiction brings to the ordinary, the routine, the quotidian, something we might say special. It creates a strange effect. It draws us in. It makes the ordinary somehow unusual, remarkable, special. This might give us insight into how literature is working as well, and that different literary forms will bring different affordances to the creation, the impression of the ordinary, of the ordinary living. Again, to give you a flavour of the subject, we have here Hamlet, which is no doubt familiar to those of you taking the Leaving Cert this year, and you'll be interested to see there the illustration from the 1913 filmic Hamlet, one of the earliest film adaptations of Shakespeare. You can see here the technological affordances that were available to them. So we have the ghost, the hologram transposed onto the screen here. And the film is capturing something of Hamlet, that Hamlet is a memory machine, that Shakespeare's play is structured around a thing that won't go away. The thing here is the ghost of old Hamlet, the memory of old Hamlet, and the ghost's requirement that Hamlet remember him, that he honours the father. And Shakespeare is here playing with, through the plot device of the ghost, of the demand that Hamlet take vengeance on Claudius, on the usurper. Shakespeare is playing with the idea of his theatre, of the platform for his art. He's playing with the idea that it is a memory machine, that in fact we have a ghost in Hamlet, but what we experience in Shakespeare's theatre is a whole succession of ghosts. And we can think here to a historical document to elaborate on this idea that the theatre is a memory machine. We have an extract from a contemporary of Shakespeare's, Thomas Nash, writing in The Defence of Plays. It's an interesting title there because he feels he needs to defend the practice of playwriting, which is in vogue in this period. It's really in its ascendancy. It's a fashionable thing to be doing, but it's also seen as threatening because it might distract people from, say, religious observance. And Nash, in A Defence of Plays, thinks about what the virtue of going to a play might be. And he imagines a scenario. He says, how would it have joyed brave Talbot, the terror of the French, to think that after he had lain 200 years in his tomb, he should triumph again on the stage, and have his bones new embalmed with the tears of 10,000 spectators at least, at several times, who in the tragedian that represents his person imagine they behold him fresh bleeding. There is no immortality can be given a man on earth like unto plays. Now Nash is the Talbot that Nash imagines here is possibly the Talbot from an earlier Shakespeare play, Henry VI, Part 1. And Talbot is this kind of military machine. He's this like fighting machine, the terror of the French, as Nash puts it. So he's here imagined as an English war hero. But what Nash is saying is that the Talbot that is appears in Henry VI, Part 1, who's a 15th century figure, is now reanimated. It's as if he's come out from the grave. And the sense of him fresh bleeding, that we can see him, that this is what theatre does. It creates a very sensory, multi-sensory experience. It's as if we're seeing history breathing again. And for Shakespeare, perhaps this is the energy of the theatre, that it can reanimate the past. Hamlet, to return to it, has a ghost. It literalizes this idea of the theatre as a place where things come back, things that might be repressed, things that might want to be forgotten, return in uncanny ways. And I mentioned the uncanny there as another way to think about Hamlet, and an example of how approaches to literature and approaches to English are different at university level than perhaps what you will have encountered in studying English for the Leaving Cert. So we've taken an example of, in a way, a historicist analysis, the Thomas Nash text as a contemporary text, contemporary to Shakespeare's own time, giving us an insight into the issues that were live in the period Shakespeare's writing. But there's other ways to think about Hamlet, of course. Other writers have returned, indeed, again and again to Shakespeare's play. It, in a way, has become a ghost. It haunts contemporary, modern and contemporary thinking. One of the writers or theorists who was haunted by Hamlet was Sigmund Freud. He was going to call the Oedipus complex the Hamlet complex. He thought of it as a play about the Oedipal struggle, the young man's desire to symbolically or metaphorically overthrow or kill the father. And we see here in the illustrations the different Hamlets, the ways in which the play has this connotation of passing the baton from one actor to another in ways that have often been quite gendered, but in more recent theatre have been complicated and been unsettled. So that hopefully gives you a sense of the approaches we would take to a literary text in a lecture. And I'll draw to a close now just to let you know about the Maynooth University Department of English. We have 16 full-time academic staff, and in addition to those lecturers, we also have postgraduate tutors. The department has a range of research interests, and at university, your courses are informed by research specialisms. So the people that will be lecturing you and you will have in tutorials have also published in their subject areas. And the slide here just gives you a snapshot, a very brief snapshot of the recent books by some members of the English department. And as you can see, they range across a variety of subjects. We have colleagues who write on American literature, who write on the 18th century, who write on film studies, on gender and Irish literature, modernism, migrant writing, post-colonial and global literature, Shakespeare and Shakespeare new media, and visual culture. So for a relatively small department, we like to think that we're fairly proactive, and this will give you a sense of the kind of intellectual life of the department, the research of it, and how that research informs the structure of the course that you would take if you were choosing to do English at Maynooth University. So the final slide just has some further information, some contact details there. If you have any questions, you can email there, or you can follow us on Twitter and post questions there. And the link to the department website is there. You can find out more about the department, about people who work in it, about the kind of work we do, about our courses as well. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that useful, and best of luck with the rest of this virtual open day.